In a conjoint analysis, you're studying people's preferences about the characteristics of your alternatives. These characteristics are called attributes. For example, if you want to find out people's preferences for snacks, you might want to know how much people care about the calorie content, the price of the snack, or how healthy the snack is. Or maybe we're selling laptops and we're curious about people's relative preferences for battery life, screen size, cost, and weight. In this example, we want to examine people's preferences for bread, so we'll be looking at the shelf life, price, type of bread, and whether or not it is organic. When choosing our attributes, we want to make sure they're preferentially independent. For example, if we are looking at phones, we can't use both style and beauty as attributes at the same time, because likely if something has a style that people like, they will probably also find it more beautiful. So those two attributes aren't preferentially independent, and if we were to include both, it would be double counting, which would skew our results. But on the other hand, being preferentially independent doesn't mean that the attributes have to be completely independent of each other. For example, we can want bread to have both high nutritional value and a low price, even though usually the healthier the food is, the higher the price. The difference is that our preference for nutritional value does not depend on our preference for price, which is why we could list both nutritional value and price as attributes. If you're familiar with multi-criteria decision-making in 1000 Minds, you will know that in decision-making, we keep costs separate from our criteria. In surveys, however, it's okay to include cost as an attribute. This is because in a survey, we want to use trade-offs to understand people's willingness to pay, rather than assessing the value for money of different products as you would under 1000 Minds decision. So let's start adding our attributes. If you want some inspiration or ideas for possible attributes, we can use the AI assistant to generate attributes for us. This is really helpful in getting started quickly, and you may be surprised by how good some of the suggestions can be. If you already have some attributes in mind, then you can add them manually. We typed the name of our first attribute in the box here, so let's say shelf life to start with. Below the attribute name, we need to add levels, in this case maybe short, medium, and another level for long. Note that the levels should be ordered from the lowest ranked on top to highest ranked on bottom, otherwise the trade-off questions won't make any sense later on. In some cases, it may be helpful to clarify what these levels mean. For example, what is a short shelf life? We can do this by adding a long name underneath the level, which is the name that will be displayed during trade-offs. So we can elaborate here how many days are associated with each level on their shelf life. We can also add a long name for the attribute name, if necessary. It's good to keep the main level names and attribute names shorter so they can fit nicely in charts and graphs. Now let's add some new attributes by clicking New Attribute at the bottom here. We can also copy any existing attribute with its levels by clicking this icon to the right of the attribute name. To delete an attribute, we click the little garbage icon to the right. With some attributes, different people may have different preferences for the order of the levels. For example, I might prefer sourdough bread, but not be a big fan of whole wheat bread, so I would put the levels in that order. However, someone else might love whole wheat bread and hate sourdough bread, so it wouldn't make sense for them to have the levels of this attribute in the same order. By ticking the Attribute Self-Explicated option, each survey participant will be asked to put the levels of this attribute in an order that makes sense to them before the trade-offs portion of the survey begins. This is what that would look like in a survey. We can also make an attribute optional. If we do this, then when a participant starts the survey, they will be asked to select attributes that are important to them. Attributes that are not selected will not be included in the survey. This can be helpful if you have a lot of attributes but don't want to overwhelm survey participants with too many questions. So, for example, if we had 10 attributes, we can ask participants to select 5 to 7 that are most important to them by going to the Options menu and setting the minimum and maximum number of optional attributes. Then, on the Customize Survey page, we can also group related attributes together and ask participants to select a certain number from each group. It would be good to get an idea of how many trade-off questions participants will have to answer to establish weights for the attributes and levels. We can find this out by clicking how many trade-offs up here. The number of trade-off questions depends on the number of attributes we have and the number of levels for each attribute. So if you wanted to include more attributes or more levels, you will have to answer more questions. Normally, it's good to stay below 40 questions, so this is a good number. But if you wanted to reduce the number of questions without cutting down on the attributes or levels, one thing we can do is go to Options, disable auto-interpolation, and manually select some levels to be interpolated. This means that participants won't have to answer questions involving this level, and the relative importance of this level will be calculated based on the weights of the levels above and below it. So now that we know how to add and modify our attributes, the next step would be to add our alternatives if we have any in mind, and then we're almost ready to publish our survey.